After this short break, we are going to start again. And I would like to present to you our next speaker, Dr. Karin Bloem. She is faculty in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of North Carolina and a research fellow at the University of North Carolina Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, where she conducts research on self-compassion and its influences on the emotional well-being of teens. Karin, you are going to focus tonight on the world of youth. Your contribution will be on self-compassion, addressing mental health in teens. Karin, it's up to you now.
Thank you so much, and it's my pleasure to be here. It's my honor to be here and my honor to present with Dr. Susan Bogles, whose work I've been following since I was in graduate school about 15 years ago. So I am really honored. I'm going to share my screen. As Wiedeke said, I'll be talking about self-compassion and the relationship between self-compassion and the mental health of teens. But before I get started, I'd like to offer a self-compassion practice. And this is a practice that's in our school version of our teen self-compassion program. So if you want to get into a comfortable position, and if you're comfortable closing your eyes, you can close your eyes, or if not, just keep them at a half closed and a downward gaze. Take a couple of breaths just to allow yourself to settle in after the break that we had. Letting go a little bit more with each exhale. And now imagine that you're at a beautiful, exotic beach. In front of you is the ocean. A deep blue-green color, perhaps. Against the cloudless, light blue sky. You lay down on the sand and feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. You can feel your skin soaking up the warmth of the sun, almost like a sponge. And the warmth is perfect. Not too hot, just enough so that it feels just right against your skin. In fact, it's just what you need right now. And as you lie here, you notice that there seems to be a feeling coming from this warmth. A feeling that envelops you, holds you, and supports you. It's a feeling of overwhelming calmness, a knowingness, a sense of peace. And you hear or feel, or maybe just simply know some words, these words. Everything is going to be okay. Somehow deep in your bones, you know this to be true. You know that whatever happens, however things work out, all will be okay. You lie on the sand, feeling the warmth of the sun permeating your body, offering you a deep sense of peace, of unconditional acceptance, and an inner knowledge that all will be well. And knowing you can always come back to this place at any time simply by revisiting it in your imagination. You know, you could stay here for another minute or so. And if your eyes have been closed, you can slowly open your eyes. So I wanted to offer a bit of an outline of where we're going, what I'll be talking about. First, I'll be talking a little bit about the mental health of teens, of adolescents. Be offering a couple of definitions of self-compassion, as well as an overview of the research on self-compassion in teens. And I'll be talking about our program, the Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens, which is a program that's been adapted from the Mindful Self-Compassion program for adults. And I'll be weaving in here a couple of practices, like the one we just had, just so that you can get a feeling of what self-compassion actually is, a felt experience, rather than me just talking about it. So, mental health of teens. You've already heard a little bit from Viveka and from Susan Bogels. We know that from 2012 to 2015, depression increased among teens, teen girls by 50%, and among boys by 21%. This time cover is from 2016, February 2016. Looking at mental health of teens. And we know that among 12 to 14-year-olds in 2014 compared to 2007, 3 times as many girls and twice as many boys took their own lives. So this is the trajectory that we're seeing. And this, of course, was pre-COVID. A few more statistics. So 14% of 10 to 19-year-olds live with a diagnosed mental health disorder. 43% of those disorders are anxiety and depression. About 20% are conduct disorders. Again, about 20% are ADHD. 70% of these teens don't get the appropriate interventions early enough. And that's a pretty scary statistic, 70%. We know that suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among 15 to 19-year-old girls and the 4th for boys. Boys also have interpersonal violence as one of the leading causes of death. This is after tuberculosis and accidents, traffic accidents. Which means that there's one suicide every 11 minutes. Again, as I was saying, this is pre-COVID. And then during COVID, we see that these statistics get a lot worse. So a meta-analysis of youth, a meta-analysis for those people who don't know, is a statistical summary of a number of different studies. And in this case, there were 29 studies that were summarized with 81,000 youth. And what they saw were a doubling of rates of depression and anxiety, or about a 20% increase in anxiety. Worse later in the pandemic, worse among girls, and worse among older teens. And again, this is referring to the first year of the pandemic. This brings us to the leading physician in the United States putting out an advisory about a year ago, and saying, among other things, that the challenges of today's generation that young people face are unprecedented and uniquely hard to navigate. And the effect that these challenges have had on their mental health is devastating. So this was a mental health advisory that he put out, saying that we need to bring our attention to mental health in youth. We're in a crisis right now. So how can self-compassion help? What can we do? How can self-compassion help improve mental health of teens? First, I'd like to talk about the definition of self-compassion, but rather than simply talk about it from a conceptual basis, I'd like to do a little exercise with you so that you can discover it on your own. So what I'd like you to do is think about a time when you had a close friend who was struggling in some way. Something happened that day that made them feel inadequate, made them feel unworthy, maybe made them feel like a failure. Maybe they got into an argument with their partner or somebody at work, and they came to you. What words did you say to them? And what tone of voice did you use? And if you can't think of a time, think of what would you say to a good friend who came to you, who felt really badly about themselves. And I'll give you just about a minute to think about this. If you have something to write with and something to write on, you can write this down. I'll give you about a minute or so. Okay. Now what I'd like you to do is imagine that you had a really difficult day, that something happened that made you feel unworthy, that you felt like a failure, you felt perhaps inadequate. Maybe you had an argument with somebody, maybe you made a mistake at work that made you feel really badly about yourself. What words did you say to yourself? And what tone of voice did you use? And again, I'll give you about a minute to think about this, to reflect on this. And again, if you have something to write with, you can write this down. You have about a minute. Okay. So if this were a smaller group, I would ask you to share what you discovered from doing this exercise. I've done it many times with many groups, and what we know is that people tend to treat themselves differently than they treat their good friends. They tend to be a lot harder on themselves than they are with their good friends. In fact, 80% of us are say things to ourselves that we would never say to a good friend. We're much more critical of ourselves than we are of our good friends. So one definition of self-compassion, the informal definition of self-compassion, is treating yourself the same way you treat your good friends when you're struggling, knowing that most of us don't do this, right? In our self-compassion programs, we teach people how to do this, and we train people how to be kinder to themselves. The more formal definition of self-compassion has these three components, and this was defined and operationalized by Kristin Neff in 2003. So the first component is mindfulness. You've heard a lot about mindfulness from Susan, and in this case, within the context of self-compassion, mindfulness is not just about being aware of what you're experiencing in the moment, but also having a balanced perspective. So in the case of teens, let's say they got a poor grade on an exam. Being mindful would be saying to themselves, well, that wasn't my best effort. I know I could have done better, but it's not the end of the world. There will be other exams. My grade isn't going to be based on just one exam. The opposite of that, or the other side of that, is over-identification or exaggerating and saying, oh, this is the worst thing in the world. I know I'm going to fail. I failed this test. I know that means that I'm going to fail these other tests. And that means that I'm probably going to fail this class and I'm going to have to take it over in the summer. But I can't take it over in the summer because I have these other plans for the summer. And just having your mind spin out like this, right? Which we all tend to do at some point or another. So mindfulness is just having this balanced perspective. The second component is common humanity, and common humanity is the understanding that what we are experiencing emotionally is common to all of us, is part of being human and part of being alive here in the 21st century. We all at times feel anxiety, sadness, depression, frustration, anger, loneliness. And this might seem really obvious when I talk about it in this way, but when it actually happens to us, when we're the ones who've had a really bad day, we tend to feel very alone. We tend to feel like we are the only ones. We tend to feel lonely. You know, we look down, at maybe other parents and say, well, they're not having such a hard time with their kids. Look how well behaved their kids are. Why are my kids acting out? Right? So sometimes we tend, or really frequently, we tend to forget, that this is part of being human. Part of the reason is that we're fed this idea from society, from our culture, that we're supposed to be happy all the time. And if we're not happy all the time, it means we're doing something wrong. We know that's not true. We know that life has ups and downs, and this is all part of it. So that's the second component of self-compassion. The third component is self-kindness. So I would imagine the things that you said to your good friend when doing that exercise were kind. And again, we more likely, at least 80% of us, tend to be self-critical and self-judgmental. In the case of the teen and the exam, a teen might say to themselves, oh, I'm so stupid, I'm such an idiot. I know I should have studied more. Why didn't I study more? That was so dumb of me, right? We tend to say, not just teens, obviously, but all of us tend to say these kinds of things to ourselves. So self-compassion is learning to change that voice, change that inner critical voice to a more compassionate voice. And there are these different sides to self-compassion. We often think of self-compassion as being tender, and it is, but that's only one part of self-compassion. The other part of self-compassion is fierce. This is the cover of a book that Kristen Neff published came out a couple of years ago. The fierce part of self-compassion is the part that encourages you to stand up for yourself. And in the case of teens, standing up to perhaps people who are bullying them, and defending themselves, and drawing boundaries. Okay, so self-compassion has both a tender and fierce side. So before I talk about the research on self-compassion, I'd like to offer you a self-compassion exercise, an informal practice, and this is called supportive gestures. But before I do, I'd like to preface it with a little bit of explanation. So when a friend is struggling, we readily and think nothing of giving them a hug or putting our arm around them or patting them on the back. We don't generally do those things for ourselves when we're struggling, but we can learn to do those things. The reason that we do them, the reason that it comes naturally to you, is because it elicits actually a neuropeptide called oxytocin that is released in our bodies when we connect physically with someone else, or when we give them a hug, or when someone gives us a hug. It's even released in our animals when we pet the dog or the cat. They experience a release of oxytocin, and we do as well. So oxytocin is called the feel-good hormone, right? Because it makes us feel good. Sometimes it's called the cuddle hormone. So as I said, we can learn to support ourselves in this way. We can learn some supportive gestures, which I'm going to introduce to you now. So we'll try these out so hopefully you can find one or two that work well for you. So you can close your eyes also to get a little bit more in touch with how these different gestures feel for you. Sometimes that's easier to do with your eyes closed, but if not, totally fine to keep your eyes open. Okay, so the first gesture is just simply rubbing your two hands together and noticing what that feels like. Maybe you're generating a little warmth in your hands. Maybe now stroking your upper arms. Noticing what that's like, how that feels. Or giving yourself a little hug. Squeeze. Maybe putting one hand on your forehead, one hand on the back of your neck. See how that feels for you, if that's comforting. Maybe just a hand on your heart. Noticing a little bit of pressure there, perhaps. A little bit of warmth. Or two hands on your heart. Maybe just making small circles. One hand on your heart. that's soothing. Maybe stroking your cheek with one hand or a couple of fingers. And cradling your face in your hands. Maybe simply holding one hand with the other hand in your lap. This is a nice one to do sometimes because you can do it without people noticing. You can be at a meeting doing this, maybe stroking one hand with a couple fingers from the other hand. And the last one is making a fist with one hand, putting it over your heart and putting the other hand on top, noticing what that feels like. And some people feel that this really elicits strength, feels like strength. Okay, so hopefully you found one or two gestures that feel good to you, good for you, that you can take with you. The teens that we teach really enjoy this particular practice, so I wanted to share it with you. So now I'll be talking about the research on self-compassion. First, I'll be talking about a couple of meta-analyses. Again, a meta-analysis is a statistical summary of studies. This one was with 19 different studies, and they found a strong negative relationship between self-compassion and psychological distress. And they define psychological distress as depression, anxiety, and stress together. So this means that the more self-compassionate these teens were, the less psychological distress they had. And another meta-analysis looked at the relationship between self-compassion and depression and found that the more self-compassionate the teens were, the less depressed they were. And this was especially true for girls aged 12 to 16. This series of studies I'll be talking about looks at teens who are higher in self-compassion and what the results were. The first study, and this was one of our studies, showed that teens who were high in self-compassion had less depression as they got older. So we know that depression increases through adolescence, but teens who are higher in self-compassion experience less of this increase in depression. They're also less likely to get depressed when they're stressed, knowing that there's a link between being stressed and being depressed. They're less likely to get depressed when stressed. They're also less likely to self-injure when they're depressed. So self-injury being, this is non-suicidal self-injury, so cutting, for example. They're also less stressed when struggling with academic difficulties. They were able to handle academic difficulties more easily. And they had better mental health when they had low self-esteem. So we know low self-esteem is associated with poorer mental health, but when teens had low self-esteem and high self-compassion, they had better mental health. So what we're seeing is that self-compassion acts kind of like an umbrella in a rainstorm, protecting against this onslaught of potential negative outcomes. So we're going to look at a few more studies, and this study looked at chronic academic stress, which we know leads to worse well-being and negative mood. And those teens who had high self-compassion were better able to handle the chronic academic stress and had less negative mood. and the study was in China. This next study, which took place in Spain, was with 15 to 18-year-olds who had been victimized as children. And because of that, that was related to poor school performance. But again, those who are higher in self-compassion had better mental health overall. This last study was with refugees in Israel who were in refugee camps and experienced a traumatic event, a forest fire, a devastating forest fire. The devastating forest fire was associated with increases in post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. But what we saw again was that those teens who are high in self-compassion had less of these psychological symptoms. So again, we're seeing this umbrella effect. So I want to talk a little bit about our program that we developed for teens. So we're seeing these studies that showed that those teens who are higher in self-compassion had better outcomes. So we wanted to see if we could cultivate self-compassion with teens. At the time, there was an adult program developed by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer called Mindful Self-Compassion, and we adapted this program for teens. Originally, it was called Making Friends with Yourself. We now call it Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens. It's 8 sessions long. Each session's an hour and a half. It's for ages 11 to 18, although we never teach that age span in one class. We'll teach maybe 11 to 14-year-olds and then 15 to 17-year-olds or 18-year-olds. It was taught only in person before the pandemic, but the pandemic changed many things along with this. We now offer it online. There's a school version that is made to fit into the school setting, and that will be published in hopefully in the next year or so. And we teach specific skills through guided meditations and exercises. In the first studies that we published, 2016 and 2017, we saw increases in resilience and something that is called curiosity and exploration. And what this is the ability to move outside your comfort zone, try new things, and take chances, and decreases in negative mood, anxiety, stress, and depression. And what we found was that mindfulness was driving the effects that we saw with anxiety, stress, and depression, and self-compassion was driving these other outcomes. Of course, we know mindfulness is also a part of self-compassion, and self-compassion is also a part of mindfulness. So this was assessed with different scales, mindfulness scale and a self-compassion scale. Again, we're seeing the umbrella effect here. This is a study that we published last year. It was a study that we did with transgender and gender diverse teens. What you're looking at here are 3 different time points before they took the Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens class. That's the first time point. The second time point is right after the class was over, and the third time point is 3 months later. So you can see that self-compassion increased from pre to post, and then increased a little bit more at 3-month follow-up. Depression decreased during the time of the course, and again decreased a little bit more at follow-up, 3-month follow-up. The 2 outcomes on the bottom are 2 outcomes that are associated with suicidal ideation, suicidal thinking. Perceived burdensomeness is the belief that you are, or feeling that you are a burden to others, to your family, to your friends. And thwarted belongingness is feeling like you're making efforts to belong and be accepted in your in your peer group and feeling like you're rejected or you're not a part, you're not accepted. So what you can see here is that there were decreases from pre to post in both perceived burdensomeness and thwarted belongingness, and with thwarted belongingness more at the 3-month follow-up. We're now conducting another study with transgender teens, and we're actually measuring suicidal ideation. So hopefully we'll have that out in the next 6-8 months or something, 6-8 months or a year. Again, umbrella effect. This is a study that we are writing up right now, and you are the first people that we're sharing these findings with. This is a randomized controlled trial where we taught mindful self-compassion for teens in one group, and a control group was the other group. It was an active control, healthy lifestyle. So they learned about exercise and good eating, proper eating, and a number of other things. And we followed them for 6 months after the end of the study was over. So they took the class for 2 months, 8 sessions. And these were teens who started out with depressive symptoms. So 6 months after the end of the study, 7 of them were depressed, met a threshold for depression from our mindful self-compassion group, and 15 met the threshold for depression for the control group. And this is a significant difference statistically. So, and the average age you can see was between 15 and 16 for this group. Okay. So we train people, or the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion trains people in our program, as well as a number of other programs for adults and other mindful self-compassion programs. This is the website in case you want to learn more about it. We have a couple of online trainings happening in 2023. Center for Mindful Self-Compassion also offers workshops, introductory courses, advanced courses. There's also a program that I worked with several other people, specifically for educators, and that's offered through Mindful Schools. That's an asynchronous program. And I would like to leave you with another self-compassion practice, which will just take about 5 minutes or so, since that's about all the time I have left. So again, if you can sit comfortably, close your eyes, if you'd like, or keep them open. Take a couple of relaxing back breaths. And letting your body find its own natural rhythm. Feeling your breath as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Feeling it maybe as it moves through your nostrils. Maybe noticing the temperature of the air. And now just focusing on your in-breath only. And if you like, as you breathe in, breathing in whatever it feels like you need in this moment. So maybe you feel like you need some strength or courage or patience or kindness or compassion. Whatever it feels like you need, just imagining you're breathing this in for yourself. On each in-breath, breathing in what you need. And now shifting your focus to your out-breath. Feeling your breath as you breathe out. Feeling the ease of breathing out, of exhalation. And now calling to mind someone whom you love, or someone you know who just perhaps needs some kindness or compassion or strength, and bringing this person to mind. Picturing them clearly in your mind. And begin directing your out-breath to this person. Offering them the ease of breathing out. And breathing out whatever it is that you feel like they need. Well, maybe they need strength or courage or kindness, tenderness. Patience, whatever it is they need. Imagine you're breathing this out for them. Now shifting your focus so you're breathing in for yourself and out for them. Breathing in what you need. Breathing out whatever it is that they need. And if you'd like, you can widen your circle of compassion to include other people. Maybe family members, friends, whoever you feel needs a little bit more support, perhaps, right now. Breathing in for you and out for others. And maybe even widening this circle more to include everyone on this call. Everyone in this country that you're in. Or perhaps even all living beings. And not forgetting to include yourself in this circle of compassion, breathing in for you, out for others. Because just like all others, you too are deserving of kindness, of compassion, of strength. So just take the last minute of this practice called giving and receiving, to breathe in for yourself. And out for others. And if your eyes have been closed, you can open your eyes. And I just want to thank you all for allowing me to come in and share all of this with you. And I leave you with some resources here. Lots of books out there on self-compassion, as well as several websites. So thank you. Thanks so much. And I will stop sharing now.
You said at the beginning of your talk, you raised questions about what words would you use and what tone you would use. And I realized that even because almost all participants of the webinar, they are Dutch, so we will not get all the words. Your tone was so intense that I think it helps everyone to really come down and listen to our own breath, our own heart. So thank you very much. That's the first thing I would like to say. There were several questions raised, not too much because people were also reflecting, but I would like to mention a few of them. You were talking about programs and classes being held in the schools. And how did you manage, someone asked, to get those programs really being part of the school program? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it is a challenge getting into schools. We are, I think probably the best way to explain it is just connections that we have in the schools. So, for example, there are a number of people who have become trained to teach our class, Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens, and they're school counselors, and so they're school teachers, and so they bring it into schools in that way. That's probably the easiest way, that they're already in schools.
And another person asked whether it's how you succeed to motivate teens to enter into self-compassion training.
I'm always asked this question. That's why I'm smiling. Sometimes teens are just interested and they want to do it on their own. Most of the time, it comes from a suggestion of a parent or their therapist. And oftentimes they're somewhat reluctant. But after the first class, they realize that, oh, it's not so bad. And in fact, it's kind of fun. So our teen program has all kinds of things in it that are developmentally appropriate. I was a classroom teacher for almost 20 years before I was a researcher. So, and I taught teens, I taught middle schoolers, 11 to, or 10, really 10 to 15 or so. So, you know, I'm aware of what works with this age group. And so we have art and music and, you know, games, movement. So different things that are appealing to teens. But they are reluctant when they first come. Yeah.
Yes. And another participant asked whether you have also experience with self-compassion programs for children or youth who have an autistic spectrum disorder.
Yeah, we always have some kids who are on the spectrum in our classes. We have not worked with teens who have high. We deal with teens pretty much who are high functioning on the spectrum, but we really haven't dealt with kids who have severe autism, for example.
And you just haven't experienced, or you think it's really not appropriate for them?
No, it's that we haven't. You know, it's pretty. Our program is about 5 years old. We started, well, more than that. We started in 2014. We started training teachers in 2016. No, I think it's really that we haven't worked with that group yet. And I'm not aware, I mean, there could be somebody out there. We've trained over 200 teachers. So there could be somebody out there who is working with that group, but I'm not aware of it.
And maybe just a final question, which I see on my screen before having the conversation, the three of us, is whether there are, whether you know there are results of training in self-compassion on the study results of students.
Of students in schools?
Yes.
You mean? We will soon. We were just funded for a study. We just received funding for a study to do a research program in schools, but we don't have that yet. That's an area that there's a lot of work still to be done with self-compassion research. And so that's next. So that will be, you know, it's a 2-year study. So I imagine in the next 3 or 4 years, we'll have something come out about that.
At the beginning, we said this world is so full of so many chaos, etc., conflicts, wars, etc. But that we really hope, we said to each other, that mindfulness, self-compassion, it seems to be a small thing. But I think at the end, we can really contribute to great changes. And we need to believe on it and practice every day our own journey of mindfulness and self-compassion. So thanks very much to be together this evening. I already saw on the other screen. Thank you. I hope we will do more of these kind of webinars in the future. So thank you very much, both Karen and Susan.